I'm assuming it's not going to be just you and me.
I'll give you an introduction and then but then there is a session. Okay. Usually, there's only one person that has a consistent commitment to 440. So I think the next is next. How long does the Q&A usually last? Usually half an hour. So you should consider roughly half an hour, 35 minutes for your presentation, and then 25 for the question and answers. So it's winter term, and so a couple of housekeeping rules. The idea is that we're all here in this physical space. Some will be joining from Zoom. So for those of you who are here, please keep your mask on unless you're either drinking or eating or asking questions. And so we're going to start in a couple of minutes. I would like to take a couple of minutes to also do land acknowledgement and also present our speaker for today. So once again, Megan, thank you so much for joining us for the last mediation talk of the semester, the fall term of 2022. And so, first of all, with the land acknowledgement, before we begin, I would like to start and we acknowledge that Western University is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape, and Arawakanagan people, on lands connected with the London Township and Summer Province of 1796. And the district once called full covenant lawful. This land continues to be home to diverse indigenous peoples, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors of our society. So the idea is that this kind of talk lasts for 1 hour. First 30 minutes usually are dedicated to the presentation itself, and the last 30 minutes instead to questions and answers that in this case might likely be from the audience here in this room, but also online. So you can use the raise hand chat or the chat feature, whatever you prefer, so that you can actually have an interesting and engaging interaction with Megan as well, even though you're connecting from the Zoom. And so without further ado, I want to present today's talk, Value, Values, and Visibility, Public Value Conflation in the Mobile Dating Industry by Megan Ball, a third-year PhD student with a research focus on data flows, business models, and practices of the mobile dating industry and applications. She also masters in communication studies from Wilfrid Laurier University and a Bachelor of English from the University of Waterloo. And in terms of the abstract, today an app exists for everything from delivering relevant news headlines to finding your most compatible partner. And so mobile dating applications are platforms that act as intermediaries, instituting our world and realities according to certain ways of being. And in common to this platform is the notion of value, such as accessibility, ease of use, and privacy. And so I don't want to take further time because I think we're all eager to hear Megan actually talk more in length about her research and interesting findings about the mobile app and this industry in particular. So without further ado, the floor is yours. Thank you so much, Megan, again for introducing yourself and for presenting in the mediation talk series.
Thank you. So hello and welcome everyone, both online and in person. And again, thank you for being here today to listen to my lecture. My name is Megan Boll, as has already been said, for those of you who don't know me. And again, I'm a third-year PhD in media studies at FIMS. And my research looks at value conflation in the mobile dating industry, as I will get into in a moment. And what I'll be discussing today is based on my successful field exam paper that I wrote this year and have passed in September. I'll be giving an overview of the terms, concepts, and arguments put forth in that paper. And in the paper, I focused on three themes of focus. So these were a history of dating apps and services and matchmaking intermediaries in an Anglo-American context, political economy of communication, and 3, data and information as power. And this is an offshoot of critical data studies, a category I have kind of named myself. And I'm going to try to highlight the co-productive nature of social life, technology, and social practices under the umbrella of value, values, and visibility in the context of mobile dating applications. So to begin with that, I first looked at a history of mobile dating apps and services as matchmaking intermediaries in Anglo-American contexts, as promoting public value and characterized by particularly solutionist discourse. Scholarship in this field typically notes a key starting point in Victorian matchmaking services or those rooted in print, so newspaper or periodicals. These were in high demand around the period of the Industrial Revolution. It's a little loose when I give it here, but we're going to go with the 1880s to 1890s, going well into the 1900s. So these were in high demand. And why were they in high demand? These publications appealed to working class populations moving to cities in search of factory jobs. Advertising themselves as social mediums for dates and friendships, these mediums provided a mode which people could connect with others. Important as courtship at the time was dependent on meeting a spouse through family ties, community networks, and other close contacts, the nature of work and city life outdated it for the working classes. So when I say working classes here, I'm referring to merchants, mechanics, secretaries, those types of people. Long hours and commutes between the factory and the home made it difficult for people to meet suitable partners, and consequently, a form of social crisis characterized by urban isolation, alienation, and loneliness emerged. These ads were affordable. They costed no more than the cost for postage and presented opportunities to meet other lonely hearts like them. Presenting courtship like a business proposition, these publications as social mediums afforded, as values, working women and men more autonomy and freedom than traditional courtship ventures at this time. So the pictures I have here, they're from the English Publications Roundabout, respectively from 1898 and 1915. And it kind of provides an example of the format these ads took. So women, up here's the woman, she's a spare, slight, fond of music, lightly temperament. Women usually specified the amount of money they wanted their ideal husband to make. It varies between advertisements, of course. And men typically wrote what ideal character they wanted in a wife and what they offered in return. So this was a male's ad. He states his income of £400 yearly and wishes to meet a refined lady. This is Tinder for the 1900s, 1800s, that sort of thing. But distinctly, I want to note that matrimonial and personal advertising markets seem to meet or appeared to solve the conditions of social isolation and matrimonial and friendship searches at this time. As intermediaries, these periodicals and publications were also characterized by a distinctly solutionist discourse by scholars. So in this case, as answers to urban alienation or as connectors or links, accommodating those without the means to find a partner, which I do agree with, but I kind of want to further, or I did further in this paper. So I utilized Jose Van Dyke's definition, and this is where intermediaries characterize the first instance of promoting or mediating public value as, within their definition, a collective or shared set of norms and values geared toward the production of common good. While perhaps maybe an obvious claim in some sense, I'd like to provide a further example of this, the argument made by scholars, so in this case, Henry Cox, that Lonely Hearts periodicals provided a solution to the first, quote, marriage crisis roughly between 1914 and 1916, and there was a second one into World War II. The times are characterized it loosely again between 1937 and 1947. But regardless, the first one was a time when divorce rates were on the rise and birth rates falling, a time of morale crises and new attitudes towards sexuality and marriage were changing. Political and religious figures looked for ways to solve this issue. And interestingly, the solution came not from the church or from the state, but from Lonely Hearts publications. Rebranding themselves as comfort publications aimed at soldiers and airmen, Lonely Hearts publications feel it was called Lonely Hearts Correspondence. Attempted first by London's The Daily Chronicle, though here I have pictured from TP's Weekly, it encouraged British women to aid the war effort by striking up conversations with soldiers on the field via ads, whom they could pursue while on leave. An ideal medium because it was read by both genders, publications also provided an unending source of pals and potential husbands for single female readers, coupling them up during the marriage crisis and resolving an ongoing morale crisis as well during the war. And this example I note particularly because it shows the kind of first turn towards people outsourcing marriages via privately owned companies and media, but also that these mediums, again, were characterized often as the means to be a solution to particular social, marital crises, meeting pressing social needs, so isolation again, singleness, failing morale, be that as it may. Here, I want to argue that dating publication intermediaries facilitated certain desirable public values about romance that did lead to common good, some common good regardless. So whether that's marriage, companionship, or just meeting somebody, while promoting other or newer values such as accessibility, autonomy, and freedom of choice. And again, regardless of the motive of these intermediaries. They aided lonely hearts looking for love, but also promoted new public values about romance. And if you're following my argument that intermediaries promote public values in the context of romance and courtship, and for the moment, I hope you do, I'll leave that to the QA if you don't, that's fine. Then I posit that public values become conflated or confused with private or economically desirable interests. Where publication dating intermediaries afforded, in terms of value, autonomy or freedom of choice, particularly for women, I further this kind of moving into the 1950s and 60s, just noting there is a huge theoretical gap that is just the nature of the field. I'll just say that now. And this was a time when the US and the UK shifted towards service economies. New technologies and labor made producing goods easier. Women replenished and sustained workforces, creating economic value and driving consumption. Here, conflicts emerged between the role of women and traditional ones, and I won't delve into this further due to time, but I'm happy to address it in the Q&A. But regardless, women joining the workforce demanded a new consciousness for time, where romantic middlemen with more authority and regulation than publications had were needed to take the messiness out of dating. Providing a new efficient and qualitative set of tools to make sense of romance, computer-mediated dating emerged as the first instance of outsourcing social processes of courtship to machines. Under the guise, however, of promoting values of accuracy and objectivity. And this is actually one of my favorite ones to talk about, but it worked as follows. Computer-mediated dating worked as follows. Participants would come in and they would fill out a form with a series of questions about themselves. I'm going to blow this picture up in a moment, but that is what the quizzes looked like. They would fill out these questions about themselves and their ideal match. And the one I have here is from Operation Match 1965. These were translated to a punch card. And they were then ran through a room-sized IBM 1401 computer, pictured behind these gentlemen up here. And participants would receive a page in the mail 3 to 6 weeks later with their top matches and contact information to set up a date. Now, computer-mediated dating was found to be desirable because there was a myth at the time that computers were always correct because they were scientific. Promoting these values meant that utilizing computer dating for women especially, they were afforded again, in terms of value, more stability and credibility in the selection of partner via this objectivity of computers. Now, computer-mediated dating did promote values of autonomy and choice. I'm not disputing that, but it also was characterized again by the same solutionist discourse as the objective scientific matchmaker, helping lonely hearts find their best match the first time around due to its objective and qualitative nature. Here, I would posit one, this was actually objective, and two, as the first instance that we see, publicly desirable values conflated or reoriented to support private interests. So to both points, computer-mediated dating was partially promoted as objective, accurate, and value-free due to the psychological questionnaire. Again, pictured here blown up. Outsourcing the selection process for the participant, these ask compatibility and again, objective questions supposedly, acting as reassurance that a client found the right person. Here, I argue these instead intensify and control the logistics of matching, searching for, and interacting with potential matches that were by no means scientifically objective in the way that they were promoted. But they were promoted like this under the cloak of publicly desirable values such as objectivity, accuracy, that sort of thing. Thus affecting the meaning of these publicly desirable romantic values via quantification, which promoted a more rationalized and market-based approach to romance and love, which would later evidently benefit the mobile dating industry model we see and know today. And the example I'm going to put forth here is of Operation Match 1965, argued to be the first computer-mediated dating service created by Harvard students Jeffrey Tarr, David Crump, and Von Morel. The company began as a school project aiming to make a more efficient pairing system for securing dates for social mixers without them actually having to go meet a woman, we were trying to invite her, all that stuff. But knowing this backstory, we can look at their questionnaire and the type of things they asked and look at their claims of objectivity and ask if they actually produce public objective values. And the problem really is filtered through their own worldviews and priorities, having centralized control over the matchmaking process. These two notably straight, white, socially conservative men defined how romance should be conceptualized in these questionnaires and what values should be made to matter. Designing the relevant questions and algorithms for matchmaking, they determined what made a good date and who should match with who. And this is a concept generally true when we look at today's mobile dating apps and the different apps that are available to us out there. And more important is that this is indicative of a conflation of public and private values again, where certain public values are reoriented to serve particular agendas under a guise of public value for common good. Erasing alternative perspectives and worldviews in the design of these questionnaires, or how romance is conceptualized and what is valued, encouraged, or engineered a desired way of seeing or disability, which I'm going to get to in a moment. Clients answered supposedly objective and publicly agreeable questions about themselves that are structured or were structured to support the socially conservative worldview and values deemed acceptable or merited by the creators of Operation Match. Claiming objectivity, though, Operation Match reproduced social structures characteristic and desirable at that time, defining what was normal or abnormal to value in romance. So thus far, I've tried to show in a brief way how early dating intermediaries promoted public value and are characterized by a particularly and problematically deceiving solutions discourse. I also want to highlight that as intermediaries gain more precedence and control, they also engage in a form of public value conflation, where under the guise of promoting value in romantic contexts, reinterpret or restructure said values to their worldviews or interests. Computer-mediated dating showcases how romantic public value conflation worked in terms of characterizing a certain worldview and values associated with it. But moving into the 80s, 90s towards the present, again, I'm aware it's a very large time gap, just unfortunately the nature of the scholarship. These characterize a conflation of romantic values within a more economic term that still exists today. A dating intermediary's success in the industry today is less dependent on the quality of marriages assigned, rather than creating a sustainable pool of daters coming and going or using the service. Compatibility questionnaires from computer-mediated dating created prototypes in this regard for data extraction formats used today, transitioning to the internet as a medium that emphasizes performativity, or selling oneself in a commodified context via the profile. Dating intermediaries now don't just conflate values about romance, but also produce them. And dating sites, around the time the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, were mostly just transferred personals to online chat boards or bulletin boards, but regardless, attempted to increase the pool of daters through intense rebranding and discursive shifts in value. First, by rebranding themselves as a type of expert helping career-invested individuals, where using their services was considered sensible life management, and using the internet medium to redefine the values of romance towards consumption. And here, I'd just like to provide a few modern examples for relevance, because this is where my research begins. Utilizing profiles and encouraging users to create their own DIY self does afford a value of liberation, but also adds another pressure onto romance to craft the most appealing persona to obtain a match or a response, while benefiting the sites by keeping a steady stream of users coming and going and using the sites. Users are also spearheaded to perform the self within a commodified context. A profile, as anyone's used dating apps today, and I'm sure we've all had experience with some, typically consists of one's educational background, maybe moral concerns, definitely their preferences, what they like or don't like, what their personality is, and almost always appearance, as signified by my own Hinge profile and the available widgets I was able to perform or utilize, which are often characterized by aesthetic tastes, so my interests or hobbies and accomplishments, whether this be school or have you. The nature of the profile designates the user perform themselves in the commodified sense defined by aesthetic tastes and likes, which function as cultural codes to signify compatibility and social status to prospective partners. It also reveals a language of class attached to material values, where lifestyle habits and interests signify how well off or who one is in life. While defining oneself within this form of commodified context and within arguably economic values, mobile dating apps today also encourage users to deploy sort of economic principle in choice of partner. supporting the business model of the applications they use, evidently. For example, filling out a profile can be conflated as making sure one will find the most compatible person for them. But compatibility in this sense is understood not in terms of moral character or who one is arguably as a person, but it's a similarity in terms of aesthetics or taste or what you like and how much you've accomplished. There's not a lot of room for me to say, besides my spiritual, maybe modern political values, who I am as a person. It's mostly defined by these commodified values. But it acts as reassurance that someone has found the right person for them because they put all this data out front, out for everyone to see. And it's detailed enough that someone who wants to match with me knows I'm good for them or I match on all the available parts. But it's also despite the fact that filling out a profile is also right for data extraction and selling, which is a common practice supported in mobile dating app economies today. And here, I'd argue we see value conflation in a more modern context. And yeah, value conflation goes beyond just the design tactics, now mediating how users understand, value, and perform romance. Increased freedom about what it meant to be single, both today and starting in the 80s and 90s, meant that singles were expected to take more control over their romantic destiny, but at the same time, lacking the guidance with which to do so. An interest in personal growth, advice, and self-help literature in the 80s and 90s helped matchmaking intermediaries, so dating sites then, and now I'd argue mobile dating apps today, rebrand themselves as these romantic experts. Stressing importance on authenticity and getting in touch with oneself, this self-help literature curated cultural scripts to what being in love was and value structuring romantic ideals of partnership, marriage, and the management of love. And evidently, this provided those dating intermediaries the means to economically support themselves while using a self-help ethos as cultural background to support and reinforce value conflation and romance. So this is all kind of signified. This is from Bumble's Instagram story where they list for their users signs that you're in a healthy relationship. That's not saying they're wrong, that these aren't signs for their own gain, but they have a sort of guide or an ethos of what makes and what does not make a healthy relationship. But for example, entertaining multiple sexual partners as well is promoted by intermediaries under the guise of erotic empowerment and personal exploration in the self and compatibility, though it provides dating intermediaries like applications with continuous clientele. They want you to keep services. So there is a phenomena here that I kind of found within my study of the comps of value promotion and value conflation when looking at dating intermediaries. Given the larger gaps of scholarship in this field that I mentioned, and how value conflation takes on a more economic turn, I turned to political economy to help explain and analyze it. Productive for understanding financial arrangements, business models, and vested interests of values in media, I also chose this scholarly field for the reason that scholars in it talked about the concept of value doubly, as first in economic means, and secondly, as sort of culturally shared norms or desires, echoing this kind of value conflation phenomena I discussed, but also calling into question ideas of power, ownership, and positionality, suggesting that economic understanding sets the backdrop for understanding how these intermediaries guided social romantic values and relations. So when talking about platform technologies as intermediaries facilitating value, particularly capitalist values, political economic scholars emphasize the value of position throughout my studies. Platforms like Tinder position themselves as entities bringing together users to interact, such as advertisers and consumers is one example. As hosts or owning the ground that these activities take place, this creates new ways of creating or deriving value and revenue. For example, just the internet as medium allowed many platforms or sites not only to just exist, but such as Tinder or Hinge, to new ways of deriving value and revenue through data extraction and collection of personal information, evidently voluntarily given by users. And important is that political economy scholars emphasize an ideological component reflective of the position of platforms. So Web 2.0 content or platforms emphasize sort of democratization or participatory rhetoric that anyone can and should share and create online content, which can be seen as an ideological norm or value encouraged attempting to continuously reproduce content sustaining these platforms. For me, value is implied doubly here as again, economic means, and also as an ideology or a discourse encouraged to reproduce the former. Supported by political economic scholars like Dallas Smith, who asserted that media or the culture industry mediates consciousness by bolstering certain values, structuring thinking and acting, offers a means to explain value conflation. A solid starting point, I'm not using Dallas Smith to guide my entire theory, but he was a good starting point, in Smith's audience commodity thesis. He argues that through watching advertisements, viewers learn to buy particular goods and spend accordingly. The activity of watching becomes a site of production, where generating economic value where advertisers purchase demographics, but also mediate watchers' life experiences through commercially saturated processes. And likewise, for modern dating intermediaries, participation for me became a site of production for engineering romantic values. Users have to participate or to craft the appealing persona or profile on both early internet intermediaries, such as dating sites, or old ones, such as publications. And today as well, for mobile dating platforms for them to work. Not just supporting the digital economy, how users are encouraged to participate are guided by economically desirable values masquerading under publicly desirable ones. So for me, this echoed early internet intermediaries taking on the role of the expert, though not as firmly. Position was implied rather than declared. Political economy scholars note the role of alienation and its importance in mediating social reproduction and consumer capitalism through and around products. People cultivate values through their experiences with media, where life lessons and the self are taught. Consequently, people are alienated from the production of themselves. And emerging in how users are able and encouraged to socialize on mobile dating apps, these produce cultural standards and norms or values regarding romance. Media via consumer ideologies, such as quantification or rationalization strategies in their approach to selecting matches. Users lost control over both their romantic values, activity, and ownership of self, not just in the sense of romantic values, but literally their data as well, can be considered an exploitative and alienated process. And this is because economically, users are mobile dating apps profit, particularly when it comes to behavioral markets needed to improve products, services, or curate prediction products for targeted ads. So for products users might want that will keep them on the platform, anything related to that. Using this data, mobile dating platforms likely mediate and encourage particular values about romance that reproduce desirable institutional arrangements for them. And just as computer-mediated dating firms did within the context of their own aims and worldviews, today's mobile dating apps are also spaces where particular romantic values and lessons are cultivated and inevitably conflated with private interests. So you're probably asking me, how are these lessons cultivated and conflated in more detail? This is actually where my research begins. Though value and values are implied as a co-productive feedback loop in what I've read, political economy scholars don't speak much to this, despite referencing similar terms in a variety of scholarship, such as ontological shifts, cultural forms, value myths, or tastes. Yet, position as platform offers a valuable starting point for me. Platforms institute an ontology misrepresenting the ways they shape public discourse online. Utilizing misleading values or myths, what scholars call it, dating intermediaries also promote a misleading discourse, promising users they will find them their most perfect and mathematically desirable match. Also claiming to be open, neutral, and efficient supports for their romantic ventures, dating intermediaries utilize these publicly desirable values to mislead users to remain. Recalling Van Dijk's definition of public values as collectively desirable values also describe a platform's position. For mobile dating apps, this echoes the misleading solutionist discourse of old as neutral facilitators or connectors who are arguably better at finding users their most compatible love match than other bodies, such as family or friends or any other media, because they are more quantitative, in-depth, and objective. So above here, we have Tinder's motto, which is swipe right. I think they've actually changed it since then, but swipe right. And it suggests a one-step action where Hinge down here says we're love scientists. And their website, if you were to go into it more, emphasizes credibility, emphasizing their expertise in the matchmaking industry and how that's reflected in their design. Mobile dating platforms associate their position and their discourse with what scholars call digital optimism, associating or portraying themselves as life enhancement tools and teaching individuals how to improve physical and mental health through quantification and empowerment attitudes. Now, what I'm suggesting may be perhaps a little contradictory itself. Clearly, these guys are not objective, And computer-mediated dating has exemplified this before. But they use misleading discourse and promotion of public value to promote their idealized position to users so that they will go on the platform and support their business model. And oftentimes we can see the agendas reflected in their architecture. A site's philosophy is often reflected in architecture, and looking at what platforms afford or value users through their interface, their algorithms, their protocol, these produce a finite number of options. We can only do on these apps what they let us do or what they give us the options to post or promote or talk about. And this is where platforms stage desirable user interactions, where they encourage some things and discourage others. Dictating user interaction through what is possible is also influence social norms and values toward actions that benefit or reproduce profitable structures. Reflecting a more encouraged, modified approach to romance and romantic values, architecture is also productive to encouraging a participatory, again, or doer or entrepreneurial rhetoric. Exemplified via the card here, this is Coffee Meets Bagels profile tips. Encourage users to take a moment to ensure they are updating, completely filling and optimizing their dating profiles to the best they can be. And this is encouraged as a normative standard for users to achieve to obtain the best results and reputation to get more matches, supported by mathematical statistics like the top 10% of liked profiles were like 35% longer, or be specific, don't just say you like to go out, but you like to catch indie shows, for example, normalizes a more rationalized, commodified, and detailed and economic approach or values toward romance, positioning Coffee Meets Bagel in this case more as an authority and not an objective platform towards matchmaking. So finally, this led me to data and information as power as my last category in the paper. And this is because positionality and the productivity of platform architectures prompted further questions about power, ownership, and again, the productivity of architectures. Where political economy offered a theoretical lens, data and information as power offered a more detailed and applicational lens to expand on power and how value and values combine to create particular visibilities about romance and romantic value. This is also because a focus of scholars in this field is on big data and algorithms with an emphasis on visibility. Big data stakes out new terrains, objects, or methods of knowing of social life while obscuring others, particularly with reference to bias in algorithms or consistent patterns of error in techniques of data generation as reinforcing and amplifying social inequalities. And so far, I think we can consider mobile dating apps as searching or querying apps in as far as they exist to find users the most compatible selection of matches. But the question that's been hinted at throughout this presentation, what is an app or app's algorithm considered compatible? Despite what mobile dating apps promote themselves as, we see weights, values, and norms informing matching process regardless of intermediary are far from neutral or equal. Each encourage particular systems of meanings, what scholars call codes, rendering some things visible and others invisible. And algorithms from your interest here, because they recommend, suggest, and provide users with what they predict to be the most relevant, new, or interesting content to consume. They're also co-productive as they're shaped by both developers and users, and they cannot be neutral entities because they also engineer and manipulate connections for consumption and data extraction purposes. To this extent, algorithms can enforce what Ruha Benjamin coins architectures of power, where merit-based systems like algorithms codify visibility according to particular narratives. For example, class. Like computer-mediated dating, the algorithms and questionnaires for determining matches in Operation Match, for example, were biased toward the designer's socially conservative values, not to mention rife with a lot of racial biases that were reflective of that social period. So I feel it's kind of worth noting here how whiteness in that case, in that example, was an encoded value of matching. So this is what they had a tolerance level for uncommon matches. So for example, if the computer matched an Italian man with a white British woman, for example, this was considered a tolerable match, though not completely perfect. It was acceptable. It wasn't great. It was acceptable. But if a white woman and a black man were matched together, this was considered unacceptable, and it was dismissed as an algorithmic glitch. Point being, algorithms reflect the cultural prejudices of their designers, affecting the extent of who or what is made visible. And as power structures, these systems don't just obscure visibility, but codify narrative behavior. Via architectures of power, where Rupa Benjamin argues that algorithmic assemblages, so for example, geolocative tracking, are one-way platforms codify and merit and parse ideas of value. Exemplified in her discussion of loyalty program apps encoding racial gender norms in diaper consumers, where points can be awarded when users purchase them in discursively well-to-do parts of the city or suburban and middle-class areas, or deducted when purchased in gentrified parts of the city, affects visibility in terms of what types of points are awarded to users, what things they are able to see when deals are made available to them, and made visible to the user based on where they purchase. Visibility can be a trap as much as an affordance, as algorithms operate according to underlying values, norms, and assumptions, categorizing users and content. It can also be a space where users are watched and disciplined as methods of behavioral surveillance. What is considered a good algorithm, often by developers, is one that creates economic value, and that it curates better and better predictions to keep users on their platforms. And mobile dating applications do the same, utilizing visibility and desirable economic values to secretly rank individuals in performative aspects. Though an outdated example that I'm giving you, Tinder's algorithm used to apply ELO scores to rank users' attractiveness. So who would be made visible as a match to whom? And this was based on what type of score your profile had, like a numeric score. And people who liked you or vice versa could affect that score. So to make it simple, if you had a profile and you were scored at a 7, you would not be visible to those who were scoring 4, but you also wouldn't be visible to those scoring a 9. But if an 8 came along and liked you, your score might go up, and you'll be more visible to those higher than you. And that will increase your score. But if a 5 or a 6 likes you, this can also deduct your score and affect not just who sees you, but how often your profile comes up at all until it just doesn't. To what weights did Tinder make this score or determine who got a good score on besides visibility? Tinder never made this public, still haven't to this day. Though likely it's based on physical attractiveness, how good your pictures were, that sort of thing. And though they don't use this system in their matching algorithm anymore, so they say, they have admitted it does still play some kind of role in how they match users together. They won't say how much. I still think it plays a big role, that's my personal opinion. But here, it's an example of how algorithms don't objectively just take raw information and data and present it to users, but pre-cook it, so to speak, to desirable ends. And for research, this is a bit methodologically challenging to figure out how they do this, because algorithms are considered black boxes in that we only see their inputs and their outputs, where their middle is often kept by the platform owners, developers, etc. But optimistic scholars like Louisa Moore here assert that analyzing the weights and thresholds of algorithms are one way to deduct how they work and what their encoded values are, generating what is made visible in the world. And doing this, she argues, means questioning what it means for a platform to deem an algorithm good enough, which is completely dependent on their values and aims of the platform and as owners. And here's where I return back to my duopoly of value and values. So this lastly implies asking about visible power structures, where agency is located, on whose behalf, and for what purpose. I drew from a Foucauldian lens to continue notions of visibility as a trap, and if users lack the knowledge via black boxing to know how algorithms see them or make them visible, knowing they are being watched may prompt users to adjust their behavior in ways that ensure their visibility, aligning, ironically, the desirable values and norms encouraged by mobile dating apps. As activities on mobile dating apps are intensively quantified and surveilled and collected for economic purposes, political economy reminds us of the need to reproduce economic logics and cultural forms, again, I argue, under the guise of public value. Using Foucault's notion of biopower, so any form of power intending to take control of the body, discourse is of real importance here in the discussion of Foucault's notion of privacy and sex, but also privacy on apps. And Foucault argues that control over this is augmented in 3 ways. Through 1, the formation of sciences, 2, as systems of power regulating practices, and 3, that forms are to recognize themselves as subjects. Asserting what romance should or shouldn't be, or what does and what does not make for a healthy relationship, dating apps facilitate particular discourses with norms and values about romance and relationships, such as, again, the one by Bumble, which I would argue is kind of pseudoscience, not wrong, but still as a kind of science saying that this does make for a healthy relationship versus a non-healthy relationship. Or this other image by Coffee Meets Bagel, giving tips on how one should structure their profile to obtain the most matches, sort of exemplary as a system of power regulating romantic practices, or how one should define themselves within the context of Coffee Meets Bagel romance. On a more active level, empowerment and democratization rhetorics mentioned earlier play a role in conditioning desirable behaviors worthy of visibility. Implicated as a part of visibility is invisibility, or not being important or considered important enough or observed enough to be granted visibility. As algorithms structure the governing logic of platforms, becoming visible on them means following their logics with desirable values. And part of this entails participation again, where the ideal digital citizen, or mobile data in our case, is one who participates, communicates, and interacts, supporting their data collection imperatives, which supports their business model. So if you refuse to do this, it's punished by invisibility or not being seen at all on the dating apps. You don't follow their rank, you don't get the score, etc. Or seeing content or people relevant to you. So if you don't fill out your profile properly, we can't help you. We don't find you the right person for you. Entailing a performative aspect, users must embrace a form of self-governance according to a mobile dating application's values, norms, and means of expressing visibility. So that leads me to conclude, where do we go from here? So there's a lot of information I've thrown at you, I'm aware of that. And they're right, again, as I've mentioned, with a few theoretical gaps as well as historical ones. Above all, what I want to bring out with this talk is that there's something happening on mobile dating app platforms with respect to a dual notion of value and values and a conflation of them between public and private interests in romantic contexts. Severely under-researched is the role algorithms play as romantic intermediaries encouraging desirable values or politics of recognizability. But problematized and highlighted here is the way that power and knowledge can be investigated in the mobile dating industry. In addition, how merit-based systems and algorithms structure what platform owners like Tinder value and their technological affordances make tangible the values they encourage is worth researching. Exemplified via forms of mathematical or neoliberal mindsets. Algorithms organize and make visible intimacy in ways to rationalize the dating process, answering the questions of who should be made visible and to whom. And some researchers debate the methods to which algorithms do this. It's a very tangled and messy theoretical thing I still have to wade through. But I leave with two questions. I ask if algorithms facilitate signals or values. Do they not structure or encourage certain forms of visibility? And do technological affordances not work to signal desirable or encourage values and norms within the context of online intimacy? Thank you.
All right, thanks very much for that. In case you're all confused, Jada had to leave early, as she mentioned, for another meeting, so I'm filling in for her to continue the moderation during the question period. So, Michelle, thanks again for really interesting. I guess what we'll do, I guess what we've normally done in the past is start with any questions in the room, and then if you would let us know if there are Zoom questions. Who wants to start? No questions. Yes, Dan.
I'm kind of formulated, but because you talk about how on these platforms that public and private values become conflated.
Yeah.
And I feel like you talk a lot about how like public values of like what's acceptable romance, but did you come across in your reading any examples of like data that was being asked of users or things people were encouraged to say that served more private interests rather than the public?
Kind of, yes. There's a lot of literature on this, and it's relatively new. Particularly, most of the authors that I read were again talking about this idea of compatibility and where it's more commodified. So I'm citing Eva Illouz here, if you've read the author. If not, she has a really good book, but how certain values or certain ideas about romance are becoming more rationalized, commodified, and that is transferred into the mobile dating apps themselves. So if that's the question that you're asking, then yeah, I've come across that data in my work.
So, like, I feel like this is such an extreme case of like, we all know we're being watched and all that, and we're all like, I think a lot of people, I shouldn't say we all, speak for everybody, but in a way we all do, sort of knowingly submit to all this stuff, but this is like a whole other level of giving yourself away, right? And in a very public way. And I don't, like, is there a difference fundamentally between this environment, like mobile dating apps and so on, and what we do in our everyday lives that people that aren't on these? Or is it basically kind of the same, giving oneself over? Do you know that, does that make sense?
Yes, I'm gonna try to answer. So what I find it's more spearheaded on mobile dating apps, it's more present, it's more emphasized than it is in everyday life. The argument being, of course, that in everyday life we do give ourselves away to certain ideologies or rhetorics, right? I think we do that without thinking. For me, though, mobile dating apps made it more apparent and made it more readily available in a way that it stood out to me. So I would say it's more emphasized on these apps than it is in maybe real life. Whether you agree with me or not is a different thing. But for me, I really found it was emphasized here in the way they structure profiles and in the economy. If you go into how data is parsed, how they take user data, how they trade it with different characters like brokers or other targeted services, it gets really fishy. And there I found, like, once you kind of, that's a whole other lecture, but when you look at those strands of how it's parsed with different characters, where it's being traded with, you go back and you look at the profile and you go, oh, this is really, really designed in a way that, so it's nice and organized and I can get all the information that the apps want, and in a way that benefits them, but they'll say it's make it more compatible. If that's what your question was.
Because it's like, it just introduces another layer to that whole digital labor, right? Like, or something. And the ways in which Google and Facebook are creating profiles of us, and you go in with your own profile and what they figured out you are.
Yeah. Oh,
but
yeah.
that you're doing the work for them. But then I wonder if they actually manipulate that in a way that arrives at something else behind the scenes. I don't know, it's interesting. And then it's just also very physical realm.
Yeah.
Like anybody, especially like in this town, everybody I've talked to who's like been on dating app, there becomes this new layer of like, I think I've seen that person, I think they've seen me, and I think we just like had a thing. And like in certain cities, it seems like in London, I feel like I always run into people I know anyway, but then the dating apps like bring that up another. And so there's a way which is just intensifying, maybe. I don't know if that's better.
I would say it's a means of intensifying. I mean, COVID kind of showed us that too. I mean, I've run across people where I'm like, I've seen you somewhere, I've swiped on you. I'm very sure I've swiped on you at one point. I think it is more intensified, and I would also argue that with COVID, where we couldn't meet in person, these apps kind of served as ways to meet people and just have a momentary conversation, whether or not you were on it for a romantic reason or not. They serve for other reasons, but I think it would intensify the data filing process. And when you mention, I guess, the digital labor aspect, I thought of one common practice in the mobile dating industry is when you grant them access to your data, what they might do is they can take like your pictures and stuff, and if they're launching a new app, they can take that image and make a pseudo profile and advertise it to people to try and get them on this new app, because you've given them the rights, right? And that was one, again, it's another lecture in itself, but that was one instance where I did read about that. I was like, that is creepy, but allowed. And I would, again, to go back to that intensification process, it just intensified the whole thing.
Thanks, thank you so much. This is news to me. I'm in a cohort where, for better and worse, you've never been on a game. Honest to God. But it makes me wonder, especially around the question of values. I really appreciate your profile of the historical continuities. I was just reading some of Alison Herm's work, and there are, echoes of the work of yours and she worked together.
I don't, but now I'm going to read what you read.
Yeah, but my question, I'm curious to know how values that are structured and communicated in dating apps in the present get jammed. Like everyone sort of thinks they're creepy. At the same time, that there are all kinds of things I think are creepy that I am and that I use and that I volunteer for and that I give my data with. So I'm not distancing myself from data extraction processes just because I have the dating app as far as I know. But I am curious about how it gets changed. Like everyone, it's common to use. You think it's creepy. So what are the ways in which people are going to mess with the work and perhaps express some sort of counter value?
So there's two fields of thought that I'm looking into. Haven't actually gotten to that point yet, but the one is that there is work by Alison Gandini, who just released it a few years ago, but he talks about how there are values that the users come in with, and there's this idea of marketing logic that's overpowering them, that they're kind of accepting as that even if they have intrinsic values of, I want someone who's intelligent, I'm going to read their profile, I'm going to make sure, that they're for me. It's overpowering. It's a lot of self-presentation rhetoric. There's another one, and this is where I'm coming to the historical aspect, where this idea of expertise and self-help ethos and advice literature that was popularized around the 80s, 90s, the timing is getting really loose here. That helps them create a cultural backbone where it started with dating sites and matchmaking services where they kind of use this self-help and looking inward as a means to kind of say, since there's no guidelines to how to get together, this can help you. This is how you can approach love. This is a means to guide your romantic journey. And that's where I would follow it to mobile dating apps today. Now, like I said, a lot of authors are kind of turning around, or turning back on that sentiment. And I don't know if that's more into yet. Again, I still have to do a lot of reading on that, I'll be honest. So I might not be able to answer the question in the fullest here, but now authors are kind of looking at, value conflict because it is a thing and how it's destroyed in the process of participating on these apps. And it's relatively new. So Gandini does some stuff on it and talks more about how it's a self-presentation thing in terms of branding, and that it's just a means, like they are aware that this data extraction is happening, but they want to get themselves out there. They need to be visible, so they just do it. And there's another section of work, and it pulls in service dominant logic, which is a relatively new theoretical field that I'm just learning about myself. But they look at values and value destruction and co-production. And in one instance of the paper I was reading, they looked at how, again, like their interviewers came in with different values that they were taught through family and friends. When they went on the apps, those changed because of just how it was structured and how they were allowed to participate on the app. So it was a clashing and a conflict of values that ultimately led to they were unsure what to do, unsure how to act on the apps. So it's relevant. That question actually is really good because it's new and it's just what new literature is starting to get at. So I'm sorry if I can't answer it fully here.
No, it's interesting.
Yeah.
The scoring, and get this.
Yes.
Like I want to see the side page that says, 4s and 7s together.
Yeah.
It's everyone's like, yeah.
And there's a lot of literature around that going around gossip too. Like what people hear makes your score go up, or what they've seen makes the score go up, but they don't know why it goes up. Just do this. And I know Sophie Bishop published an article just looking at that in the context of Facebook YouTube influencers. like beauty influencers and different things to make themselves more visible to the algorithm. And how it's not like said explicitly, but the different forms of gossip perpetuate ways of visibility that benefit you.
University.
I'd
A
love
lot
to.
of those apps.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I'd love to. Okay. I didn't know that myself. I'd like to know how it works.
Just another one. Do you know Richard? No, I've been meaning to contact her.
I've been meaning to.
Did we, did I mention this already, or have you just?
No, I work with Joanna Red, and she told me to
Yeah.
reach out to her, and I've been planning to, because I'm doing the proposal process for my dissertation.
Like writing a memoir
Oh, really?
about, it's a memoir about every dating.
I'm going to reach out to her very soon.
Really cool. It's in health studies, so it's just like, yeah.
I'll be reaching out to her, but yeah, it has been mentioned to me. It's just I admit I have not had the time to with all the things that have been happening with the coughs and the going. Yeah.
It's a good one, yeah.
Thank you.
There's no questions in the chat, but I actually do have a question for you. Maybe Lisa and I are in the same pool because I've never used a dating app before either, but so I'm assuming that the revenue model that you've seen in these apps is similar to like Facebook and Google. They harvest your data and they sell it. That's correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so and in the apps themselves, there are ads or no ads?
Depends on the app.
Like
but
Tinder, for example.
Tinder would you had swipeable ads. You
Okay.
swipe for if you want a freemium profile, and one would come up.
So do you think that people that use dating apps are as aware that their personal data is being bought and sold as, say, the communities of Facebook and Google users are? And a side note, I recently saw this thing, it's called a Facebook container plugin on where the tendrils that Facebook puts out, like you could be on a tech blog, and if they have an agreement with Facebook, the information that's going into that, like the clicks that you make there, could be harvested by Facebook, even though you're not on Facebook. And this extension stops Facebook reach from communicating with other sites that you're on. So their reach is very, very wide across the net. But do you think that people that use dating apps are as familiar, or that their information is being bought and sold as like Facebook and Google users, or no?
I personally would say no,
Hmm.
just because the ways in which like the container aspect you mentioned is less visible in the sense that like on Tinder, you sign up via Facebook, you can, there's other options, but the most popularly used is via Facebook. And there's a data transfer between them. So as a third party, they're allowed to have access to your information and vice versa. I'd say they're less familiar just because that economy of where their data goes from those dating apps beyond obviously third parties. I'm fairly sure like they know if I'm seeing advertisements, someone like Facebook is getting my information, or Spotify or Instagram, whoever I connect that app to. The less visible part for me is how their data is taken and used beyond that third party branch. So what is less known is that Tinder, Hinge, Coffee Meets Bagel is not one of them, but a lot of the dating apps that are really popular and that you know about, they're owned by one company. They're called Match Incorporated. And they have all of your data and they parse it out to different aspects that are less visible, less seen. It's very difficult to find where they bring it beyond, their parent company and how they interchange it. Tinder and Hinge, or Hinge and this other company that we're trying to launch, that sort of thing. So again, to answer your question, I'd say it's visible in the sense of third-party advertisers. Like I'm sure if they're asked, you're allowing Facebook to access this data, they're like, yeah, I know, I'm aware to some extent. But the other aspects where it's like institutional on business level, on company level, it's less visible. It's not seen.
I'm building off of about people trying to jam or disrupt. Because you were talking about like the black box issue and people not knowing exactly how the algorithms function, especially when they utilize machine learning. I was just thinking about it, and I wonder, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about it, if that's not actually a feature of these systems. Because normally we think of the black box algorithms as a problem, but like we all know people try to gamify like these platforms, so if they told people how they work, and or people were able to figure out exactly how they work, then wouldn't that reduce the utility for people who are genuinely looking for like matches, or I'm not sure. But
There's a case to be made both for the businesses themselves. Right here, this talk approaches it obviously from the user perspective. From an ethical perspective as well, the business has rights. So what they're more concerned about is also users gamifying the system, because that makes it less, I guess, fun and engaging for them, so those customers, but also competitors. If they were to make it open in the sense of like anyone could see how it worked, how it was leveraged. Competitors could get a hold of that algorithm, make it better, make it stronger, and then they're in business there. For me, there's a balance, I guess. There's a balance between transparency, like in the sense of too much transparency and too little transparency. If you go to Hinge, for example, and that's what I'm thinking of here, they're probably the most transparent in terms of they'll tell you like, this is the type of things we'll kind of take into account when we're matching you. They won't tell you exactly how it works. You can do a bit of research and you can find the system that they use to model to some extent. That's a lot of technical jargon. I need to save you that. But you can find some things and they try to make it more clear to the user, like without confusing you. So it's still black box, and there's a little more elements that I would like to be visible to people, just in terms of not step by step. I don't need to hear how you do it step by step, which is more clarity on what they do. But yeah, there's still a black box element for me. And I think it's still worth researching, if that answers your question.
oh no, for sure. I guess just one thought could be like bring up Hinge. Do you think there's a difference between like I know they don't get explicitly qualified in this way, but like Tinder's considered a corporate path.
Yeah.
And like Hinge, though, is more about like connection. So do you think like that plays into the amount of information they share, or how they structure the information for users?
Apps have varying cultures, so Tinder is absolutely considered a looser app, in the sense that also in profile design, there's less structure or encouraged things, I guess, is what I would say you can do. And it's more visually based, which kind of shows off that hookup aspect. Whereas Hinge, I read it in an article, and I wish I could cite it for you, said it was more for creative people and intellectuals. So there you can see the word love scientist aspect. And interestingly, I met my partner off Hinge, so I don't know if that explains it or if it's working or not. But yeah, it's definitely the culture, and I think that determines, how much of transparency they're willing to give versus, again, their culture, their app culture.
Any other questions? If not, I'm going to thank you very much. This was such an interesting talk. Slightly bordering on my own research. So very interesting. I want to thank everybody for coming. As usual, this is our last mediations talk for this term. Next term, we'll have a whole new mediation meeting. They will likely be sending out a call for presentations early in the new year, if not sooner. I'm not really sure what their plans are. But we will have, I'm sure, a lot more really interesting talks in the new year. So with that, I thank everybody for coming. And again, I thank you for the talk. And that's it.